Iranian conservative lawmaker Dr. Amir Hossein Sabati, he said, "What good did you see from the negotiations in Oman that you now want to send a delegation to Turkey? Now it's Geneva, right? Last time they bombed us during the negotiations. Why are you so eager to repeat the same strategic mistake? What more concessions will you offer them in order to not go to war? Today, the Iranian nation demands a preemptive strike against Israel, not to show weakness, and negotiate with them again." As the countdown continues to war against Iran, I want to discuss a potential start of this conflict that I think a lot of people are not discussing, and probably because it's rather unlikely given the political leadership in Iran and the nature, the history that Iran has exhibited in prior military conflicts over the past several years. But it is still a possibility. And I think there's actually a very real possibility that one outcome could materialize. Okay. Now, if I were to sit here and tell you that Iran was planning to launch a preemptive strike on Israel or U.S. assets, maybe you'd think I'm crazy. But they've actually already threatened this in a very specific way. They said if they began to see that the U.S. missile silos, the troops, the fighter jet pilots were all rushing along and getting ready in their positions to launch a coordinated strike on Iran, right? If like they could see it, they had various satellite, images or videos at air bases and on the vessels potentially across the region, and they saw that this was all happening. Okay, I mean, that is a point in which you could see Iran saying, we see it's about to happen. It's minutes away. We are going to launch the first strike. And when you think about it like that, that's not really too out of this world. It's far different than if Iran were to say this very second, as the negotiations are still ongoing, right? They're still happening in good faith, totally good faith, right? Not like this is an effort to buy time for the U.S. to get more assets into the region. If Iran were to do that this very second, and there weren't fighter jet pilots scrambling into their jets, if the troops on the USS Abraham Lincoln weren't, manning the launch pads, and this wasn't all happening at this very moment, and it was kind of like Operation True Promise 2, that would be a very big surprise. That would be extremely unlikely. Okay. But the first scenario I laid out actually has been discussed. We have seen that the Iranian military leadership has said that if all the signs show a strike is about to take place, we're talking minutes away, then they would consider launching the first strike. Now, there's a lot of ways in which this war could actually materialize. We could see a maritime blockade, a naval blockade, for example, that could spark things off. We could see a lot of different ways in which this actually begins. And quite honestly, I mean, the U.S. has already launched the first bullets. They knocked an Iranian Shahed 139 reconnaissance drone out of the sky for no real good reason. Because every day prior to that and every day after that, we've seen these Iranian drones doing reconnaissance missions in the same exact locations, following these U.S. warships around. And the U.S. has been doing the same. They've entered into Iranian airspace. They've flown over Iranian ports and practically over Iranian soil. So this is, we could say, yes, the U.S. has already fired the first bullet, but I want to point this out to you because this has already been discussed by the most senior levels of military leadership in Iran. They warned several weeks ago, January 6th, that the country could respond before an attack if it detected clear signs of a threat, a stance that implicitly raised the possibility of preemptive action amid rising tensions with the United States and Israel. In a statement carried by state media, the council said allegations and interventionist remarks directed at Iran could be treated as hostile acts if they went beyond rhetoric. It said Iran's security, independence, and territorial integrity constituted a red line that cannot be crossed, and warned that continued hostile behavior would prompt a response with full responsibility for the consequences resting with those behind it. The statement said that within the framework of legitimate defense, Iran did not consider itself restricted to responding only after an action had taken place and would treat tangible signs of a threat as part of its security assessment. Any infringement on national interests, interference in internal affairs, or action against Iran's stability will be met with a proportionate, targeted, and decisive response. An escalation and threatening language and interventionist conduct that goes beyond verbal posturing may be interpreted as hostile behavior. Now, the reason why this is very, very important is because we've kind of already, well, first of all, I mean, they've said as much in this statement that, look, I mean, if you guys try any more of these Mossad riots, if you try to even destabilize us internally, we can take reciprocal action. But we've already seen what Iran is capable of when they are not being attacked and they have, full discretion to respond to a prior act of aggression against their nation. That was Operation True Promise 2. And Operation True Promise 2 looked far different than Operation True Promise 3 for one simple reason. Operation True Promise 2, Iran's, their launching systems, their missile systems were not in any way limited by the ongoing threat of Israeli strikes against Iran, meaning that they basically got to throw everything in the kitchen sink at Israel, and they couldn't do a single thing about it, right? Okay, well, they didn't hit Tel Aviv in Operation True Promise 2 like they did in Operation True Promise 3, but what was very clear is if that they had wanted to, if they weren't targeting these air bases in the Negev desert, which are said to be the most secure air bases in the world, they could have done a lot more damage to Tel Aviv than we witnessed in Operation True Promise 3. Because in True Promise 3, I mean, it was firing going both ways. Internal Mossad saboteurs were launching drones at the Iranian air defense systems left and right. And a lot of the Iranian missiles, not the majority of them, but a good chunk of them were being intercepted by whatever, level of successful air defense systems Israel was able to deploy. And I want to point this out. This was first echoed by Middle East Spectator, who wrote on Telegram that when you look at footage of Operation True Promise 2, as opposed to Iran's operations during the 12-day war, or Operation True Promise 3, it's clear why preemptive strikes are so important. During True Promise 2, Iran had the initiative. We attacked from multiple missile bases that were fully operational and when Israel did not expect it. As a result, at least 50 missiles hit their targets in one wave. Anyway, during the 12-day war, Iranian missile bases were heavily suppressed, which led to a lesser volume of missiles being launched simultaneously and therefore less hits in each wave due to easier interceptions. In my opinion, he says it's a waste of missiles to wait for the enemy to attack first. Iran's missiles provide their primary advantage when used in an offensive context when Iran is the attacker, not the attacked. Now, I want to be very clear. Those are the opinions of an Iranian, commentator, analyst online. We want to be very clear for the YouTube community guidelines team, right? We are just observers in this whole matter. We don't have a dog in the fight. But there is something to be said about what we witness in Venezuela. Okay, I mean, Venezuela doesn't have the missile capacity of Iran. That's a non-starter type of conversation. They do not possess that. They don't have anywhere near the amount of missiles nor the technological capability that Iran possesses. Even when you look at their drone technology, right? Iran is years and years, decades ahead of what Venezuela has. Venezuela's, mode of conduct, I guess, if there were to be a war that was going to break out, was going to be it was going to be a guerrilla war. It was going to be like Vietnam. That was the whole idea there. And, well, we didn't see that. We did not see that. We saw the president get kidnapped, right? But the United States knew it was not going to be able to survive a full-on guerrilla war style conflict, a lot of urban conflict in the barrios against Venezuela and the various, paramilitary groups and militia groups. They knew that. Now, when we look at the Venezuela situation, it's worth noting that even though they didn't have the, missile capability, it was the United States who understood that this was a game of chicken. Maduro had offered a lot. It offered great deals for the United States. The United States felt as though Trump felt as though that was not good enough. So they had to get some red meat. That red meat was the kidnapping of President Maduro. But could that have been averted if, in fact, Venezuela launched preemptive strikes on the United States? You say, Jackson, if Venezuela had launched preemptive strikes on the United States, they wouldn't have done a whole lot and it would have invited a war. Well, probably. But don't you think that the United States, the one thing Trump didn't want to do in Venezuela was to enter into a guerrilla-style war against the Venezuelans on Venezuelan soil? He knew that was a losing fight. He knew that would be an endless, forever conflict yet again, but in our hemisphere. He knew that Americans would feel that because, well, you'd have American troops probably going back in body bags. That was not going to help his approval ratings. So I guess the question is, what would have changed? Well, the United States would have been dragged into the conflict by Venezuela. A lot of people would have died for sure. But Venezuela would have still kept their sovereignty, probably. Maybe that's an extremely naive sort of take on this whole situation. But what I feel happened in Venezuela was, right after Maduro was taken out, regardless of whether you believe that there were, saboteurs at the highest level or not, what's very clear is they immediately bended to almost every single demand by the United States. Sure, okay, Venezuela still has control of their oil assets. They have majority control, which is basically what, Venezuela operated under in agreements with Chevron for the past several years. So nothing changed, but there is going to be a U.S. embassy in Venezuela. That's a sure thing. There's going to be a lot of new contracts. There's going to be a lot of new agreements. There's going to be a U.S. embassy there. And the foreign policy tone of Venezuela, has it shifted? Well, I guess that's, left to be seen. There's a lot of things that could still happen in Venezuela. We are still in the very early morning hours. But I do believe that if Venezuela had demanded a guerrilla conflict against U.S. troops, it would have put Trump in a very, very, very weak position. He would have been cornered, and he would have had to make a decision that ended either with a long-term conflict in Venezuela that definitely was not going to go well, or backing out. So compare that to the situation in Iran. Okay, the U.S. has a lot more firepower around Iran right now. They're far more committed, I think, to achieving their goals than they were in Venezuela. This is a far more highly contested issue. The American public still doesn't support it, even though it's far more contested. I mean, I think it was like 80% of Americans oppose war on Venezuela. This war, Iran, is still majority oppose it, but it's less. And Iran has far greater capabilities at their disposal. They've been preparing for war against the U.S. specifically for decades. Israel's a side quest. War against Israel, side quests. They've been preparing for America for decades. And I don't think it's going to go well. So you got the question now. What does Iran choose to do? Do they follow in line with these negotiations, which I think are really on a road to nowhere? Every day you hear something different from the Trump administration. One day they're saying, we're not demanding they give up uranium enrichment. The next day, today, they are saying that. Witkoff is saying that. Where's this leading? They already said that it's been broken. The trust has been violated. Nothing's going to happen. Okay, well, what are we doing then? The Iranians are waiting until the USS Gerald R. Ford, the largest, most powerful carrier strike group, gets into the region right off their coast. Why? Seriously, why? Oh, I understand why. They are good members of the international community, and they're waiting to see the full conversations out with the United States in Geneva. Because if the conversations are held fully in Geneva, then maybe the Iranians could get a deal that's even worse than the JCPOA, which was an objectively shit deal for the Iranians even back then. So what? You've exhibited your power against Israel in the 12-day war, and in Operation True Promise 2. They are terrified. Trump is kind of right now playing a game of chicken and mouse, right? And cat and mouse, whatever it's called. And you're negotiating in Geneva under the auspices that if these deals go through, it's going to be worse than the JCPOA, worse than the Iran deal. Why? Okay, I just don't see how this makes sense from any sort of strategic viewpoint. Okay, I don't understand. Now, there are politicians in Iran who are calling for just that. Iranian conservative lawmaker Dr. Amir Hossein Sabiti, by the way, the doctor, he follows me on Twitter. Great Twitter feed, by the way. Everyone should check it out if you want to understand what a real Iranian patriot is saying and thinking right now. He said, what good did you see from the negotiations in Oman that you now want to send a delegation to Turkey? Now it's Geneva, right? Last time they bombed us during the negotiations. Why are you so eager to repeat the same strategic mistake? What more concessions will you offer them in order to not go to war? Today, the Iranian nation demands a preemptive strike against Israel and American bases in the region, not to show weakness and negotiate with them again. Again, those are his opinions, not my opinions. Very clear for YouTube, right? We don't got a dog in the fight. We are just observing what lawmakers are saying, what politicians are saying, and we're analyzing it, right, guys? But it is very interesting that this man, Dr. Amir Hossein Sabiti, he was the campaign manager in the most recent elections in Iran for Saeed Jalili. Saeed Jalili was the principalist, the hardliner that was running for president against the now president, Dr. Pezeshkian. It was a rather close election, not super close, but kind of close, right? The election was kind of close. And Saeed Jalili he had a very beautiful economic vision that he had for Iran. That's what I was most interested in, things that he was saying, because at the root of this all, at the root of Iran's issues is how do we get out of this economic crisis? Obviously, there's an economic crisis. Obviously, this is as a result of the U.S. economic warfare, the hybrid warfare, the decades of sanctions, right? The ripping up of agreements that they signed and said that they, will enforce with good faith, but they never did because they're not honorable actors. So maybe let's not make deals with the United States anymore, right? How do you get out of this situation given the fact that you have no way out begging, the United States? That's not going to lead anywhere. Begging the European Union, begging the United Nations, the IAEA, Grossi, whoever it is, not going to get you anywhere, right? So how can you get out? Well, Saeed Jalili had a beautiful economic vision for Iran. But also he was a principlist hardliner when it came to the question of foreign policy. He ran in the elections after the martyrdom of Ibrahim Raisi, the former president of Iran, who many speculated might become the supreme leader of Iran one day. Khamenei, the current supreme leader, he was president of Iran when he was a young man. All of this is simply to say that it appears as though, to me, the path of least resistance, the path of saying, oh, we're not doing anything wrong, we're willing to talk, to work, to make concessions, has not worked out well for the countries that have followed that path. Venezuela, chief among them. The North Korea model. North Korea is fine. North Korea is very good. The people are happy. There are not missiles being launched at North Korea. No one is invading North Korea. No one is even thinking of that. In fact, South Korea is trying to temper the tensions with North Korea because South Korea has a massive demographic issue. They have a massive economic issue. The demographic issue in South Korea is so bad that within a few generations, the North Koreans can just march into South Korea and no one's going to be able to do a damn thing about it. I have seen very positive actions taken by the Iranian after the Mossad riots, which took place in January. That being that there is a serious discussion and serious planning being had now in official government statements regarding the safeguarding of an Iranian internet, a sovereign domestic internet with their own network, completely cut off, giant firewall, just like China has, just like North Korea has. And that I think is that's really the biggest step that they need to take right now. Obviously, matters such as the ones that we discuss in this episode today are matters that only directly apply in times of near conflict. But the economic issue, Saeed Jalili needs to be listened to in Iran. I think personally, I think that Dr. Amir Hossein Sabati needs to be listened to. I think that those pursuing a sovereign internet need to be listened to, or else I don't think it's going to end up well. So that's what I pretty much wanted to yap about in this video. Very interesting stuff. Do I think that's going to happen? I think it's rather unlikely. I think the U.S. will take the first blow, but we will continue to follow and see what happens. Before you leave, I want to say thank you for the support, because after 2 years of being banned, we are finally back home on YouTube. So be sure to subscribe to our channel and also join as a member on our channel using the link at the top of the description. I rely on the generous support of viewers like yourself to get the truth out to as many people as possible. You can also support the show on Locals or Give Sin Go. The mainstream media and the powers that be are never going to stop attacking us for bringing the truth to as many people as we do. Thank you so much for your support.